Welcome to the Worship Keys YouTube channel. My name is Carson Bruce. So glad you're here. We talk all things music theory, gear, industry, and ministry for your worship keys playing. If this episode is beneficial for you or you have any questions as you continue to watch, feel free to comment below, and I'd love to hear any feedback that you have along the way. So let's get into today's episode. We're with David Ramirez. Welcome to the podcast, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So glad that you said yes to coming on the pod. Guys, this guy is incredible. You've probably listened to a lot of music that he's been a part of. You've been with Leland for a long time. Is that right? Off and on,
probably
I guess?
About
I don't know.
10, 11-ish years.
Okay.
I joined the band as the keys player after Jack stepped down to become a pastor. So Jack Mooring is Leland's brother.
Okay.
And then he started a church, or became a pastor at a church.
Okay.
And then they needed a keys guy, so then I joined the band, and then I've been touring ever since then. The biggest thing for me was Leland and CeCe are very special people, and they're the realest people. And so touring, it was like you're with your best friends, and you all love Jesus, and you're all of one mindset. And it's not like we were just packing our bags, going to play a show, tearing down, not hanging out, and then going home. So I was very fortunate to be a part of this for basically a decade.
Yeah.
There's so many beautiful and special moments and memories. Leland's the guy that will be on a plane and he's reading his Bible, praying, and not minimizing what other artists may or may not do, but he's always that person who's always been rooted in the Word.
That's awesome.
And he's like a big brother to me. And I grew up listening to Leland, so I was already a fan. And so for me, it was like, oh, this is awesome.
Yeah,
I get to play some of these songs that I grew up loving when I was a teenager.
Yeah.
Like Sound of Melodies, Opposite Way. There's so many. Tears of the Saints. And so for me, it was like, this was a new season, especially when I was like 21, 22 years old. You get to travel the world with your best friends and met so many people across the world, like different types of churches, different cultures, like Scandinavia, Australia, the UK, Brazil, like so many. And then through the years, you might go back to some of these churches and you like have friendship with people in these churches and you pick up where you left off. And so there's also the aspect of this global community, but not everybody has that experience that I had with touring. So I feel very blessed that I had the good side of it. Not to say there weren't challenges with it, in the sense of there's 6 a.m. flights, got to be up at 3 a.m, and you're exhausted, and you show up, say you had an 8-hour flight, you get there, you got to set up all your gear. We didn't have like roadies or anything. We set it all up ourselves. And then you got to lead worship that night, and it's like you're wrapping up 11 midnight, and your body is physically just tired, but you still there's the side where people want to talk to you,
right,
and then learn from you. And so you're like, how do you navigate being awake for 18 hours and then still having a productive and conversation that could bless somebody? And Leland and CeCe were always the best at knowing how to manage the intensity of what touring can look like, but also still have the heart of worship and heart for people. And honestly, I learned so much from them and how they navigate that. I didn't walk into it with that mentality. I like learned it from them. So they were always examples for me. And yeah, I learned so much from Leland specifically on how to bless people, how to inspire people. But also you have to walk through it yourself before you can show somebody else what potential they may have,
for sure,
or even just motivate somebody and encourage somebody.
Absolutely.
And so there was a lot of beautiful memories of touring. I don't tour anymore, but so it was bittersweet when I would play my last shows with a lot of artists that I was dear friends with.
Guys, I really just want to talk more with David, get to know a little bit of his background, who he plays for currently here in 2025, what's in the future as well, how you got started with songwriting, producing. He's a producer, songwriter, a programmer, but the big thing we're focusing in on here on the Worship Keys is really keys and synth programming. He's a nerd of all things sound design, all about who is David Ramirez and what does he do? What's programming synth? Like maybe some of you don't even know. What does that mean, like programming? What's the difference between producer and programmer? So all those things are in today's episode. But right now we're in Gnome Studios. Tell us all about that, David, because you have a big part here and Gnome Studios in Nashville. And if you're watching on YouTube, if you're listening on podcast, you might need to switch over to YouTube and see this, because behind us, we have this beautiful 1974 console. Tell us all about the studio. Tell us about this console, which I loved.
Yeah.
1974. I have an old Pontiac Le Mans. It's 1974, so that was just kind of like a special year. I wasn't alive during 1974, but I can imagine it was a great year.
I like to tell people I have not 3 lives, but 3 lanes that I have different hats in that I've lived at least the last like 15-ish years. Like one of them is David, the keys player, musician. Then there was always David, the producer, writer. And then there's David, the gnome, you could say. Gnome Studios.
Yeah.
And somehow I've had to navigate all 3 of those lanes in the last 15 years at the same time.
Okay.
And in the process, you're involved with the church, and I get married, and now I have 2 kids, and so then there's family life and all those things. And so the studio, I started the studio in 2014 with 2 other guys right out of college. We were 21 years old with no money, but we were in a synth pop band that we had started in college and had a synth and would make synth pop music.
Yeah.
In college. It was a lot of fun.
Where did you go to college?
Belmont.
Okay.
I went there for 2 years and then quit halfway through.
Okay.
Because I didn't want to pay for 2 more years of tuition. Get 2 more years of debt, basically.
Yeah.
I didn't want to do that.
And we're in Nashville,
personally.
Tennessee right now. That's where
Yeah.
the studios are. It's just down the road from Belmont University.
Out of college, we decided, Steven Ernest, one of the other studio owners, randomly called me. It was like within the same year that I had just joined Leland Band. He was like, hey, we've always dreamt about building a studio in our like 40s or 50s. What if we started it now? And I was like, wait, what? You want to start a studio now? Like, with what money?
Yeah.
And he's like, I had 2 or 3 synths that I had bought at that time. And our other friend, Chase Weber, it was the 3 of us who started it together at the very beginning. Steven and Chase had met at an internship at a different studio. They became friends. Steven invited Chase. Steven and I were roommates in college, so he invited Chase over for a hang. What's hilarious is of all the movies we could have watched, we watched 500 Days of Summer the first time we all hung out, which is hilarious, and had ice cream. Just like a house of 5 guys in college, you know?
Yeah.
But Steve and I were good friends. We were in a band together, and then Chase became our engineer for our band.
Okay.
And then we just started making music together. And when I was in college, broke and unemployed, I stumbled across like gear flipping.
Okay.
And so when I was a sophomore in college, I wanted to teach myself guitar. But I wanted an amp, I wanted an electric guitar, and I wanted some pedals. But I couldn't afford it. So then I looked around in my dorm when I was it was probably freshman year actually. And I was like, I got this PlayStation. I'm not playing it that much. I could sell this for a couple $100. I have my trumpet from high school. I could sell this for a couple $100. So I started looking for random knickknacks that I could just put on Craigslist. And I bought like a guitar, a Fender Blues Junior, and then a distortion pedal. And then I was like, I want to try more sound effects, but I don't have more money. I didn't just have any money lying around. I was literally like no money in my bank account. Didn't even have a car. So I was like, I have this pedal. Let me think what it's a Tube Screamer.
Okay.
Probably paid $60 for it at the time, maybe 50. And then I probably wanted to try like a delay pedal or something. So I sold that, got my $50 back, bought a $50 like DD5. Probably at the time they were like $50. I'm like, oh, I want to try a reverb pedal. So I would sell the DD5. I think the first pedal I bought at that time probably would have been like an RV3 or an RV5. But I sold the DD5 for $80. So I made $30.
There you go.
So then now my budget became $80. And I kept doing it.
Yeah.
And I was like, wait, I'm making money off of this, and then I could keep acquiring more things.
Yeah, yeah.
So then it became this whole, like, you start with a penny and end up with $1 million kind of thing. I don't have $1 million. But that, like, very basic principle, I created something called Gnome Music Shop,
Yeah.
which is the predecessor to Gnome Studios. So then before reverb.com existed, Instagram had just been created. We would post pictures of food, and you would use the built-in filters, and you just post dumb pictures with your friends. It wasn't like this thing that we've created now. It was just literally social media at its very core. And so then I created No Music Shop Instagram page that no longer exists. But then I built a website for it. I would post like a pedal or a guitar for sale with this little gnome.
Yeah.
And it became No Music Shop. And so it built a following on Instagram in those very early days. I don't remember. It probably had 7,000 or 8,000 followers. But in those days, that was a lot.
Yeah, yeah.
And this is, everybody was wanting to get like a verified, kind of a
right.
real verified user situation. But then it was like, oh, you have 10,000 followers? That's crazy. But I built this thing, and I would just post things for sale on Instagram, would sell them, ship them. I would also sell stuff on eBay. So Gnome Music Shop built a following and a brand. And so when we decided to start a studio, we're like, what are we going to call it? The other guys were like, we should just call it Gnome Studios. It's already a brand. A lot of that gear that I was flipping, we would have in the studio. So you'd have, say, a Juno 60 just sitting around because I was flipping it.
Yeah.
But it would be useful at the studio. So then it was there and then it'd be gone, because I need to make money. But then I would buy something else, and there'd be another really cool random synth or guitar or whatever. So that's how Gnome got started. And then we started to make music for ourselves. And eventually our friends were like, hey, can we use your studio? I'm like, okay. Then a lot of our friends started wanting to use our studio. Then we're like, okay, let's just turn it into a business and charge people so that we don't have to pay for this. We basically found a commercial building, got a year-long lease on it, and then built like a small studio. And it was literally like a control room and a live room. We just wanted somewhere we could track drums. And then we combined all of our gear. Steven had his guitar stuff. Chase had a lot of guitar stuff. They both had some outboard gear and some mics. And I had a bunch of keyboards and a bunch of random stuff that would always float through No Music Shop. So then we put it all together. And I guess this is a studio. Our own, I think, what were our first monitors? They were probably like KRK somethings. I think probably my V8s maybe would have been the very first monitors we had that I found like Craigslist for like $100 when I was in college. We used the tools that we had available to us, and a lot of our friends started using it. So then we turned into a business, and then for 10 years we were in a different location that was a quarter of the size that we're at now. And then in the end of 2023 we moved to this location, which is 4 times larger, and it's an old cabin from the 70s.
It's beautiful.
A lot of history. There was already a lot of hits, like country hits from like the 80s or mostly the 90s, recorded here. Like the Dixie Chicks did their first 2 records here. Oh, wow. Kenny Chesney did a lot of stuff. Aerosmith. There's a very long list of artists who have. It used to be called Westwood Studios, and so this console specifically was a good friend of ours, Ethan Barrett. And so he found this console at a sale, and it was completely gutted. And for context, this is a 1974 API, and there weren't many of this model made. I believe it's a 3224, if I remember correctly. But this is probably the only 40 channel of its kind. Crazy. Because a guy named Leon Russell had API custom built this very specific one for him. Wow. And he would have written with the Rolling Stones and the Beatles with this console. Whether they were demos or masters, there's no way of finding out, but there's like pictures of him with those artists with the console in the back.
That's amazing. And
so Ethan found it completely gutted, because I guess it had been out of commission for I don't know how many years, maybe 5 or 10 years in LA or somewhere in California. And this guy in Nashville bought it, shipped it to Nashville, asked a bunch of techs to restore it. They're like, this is going to cost you way more to restore this thing. You should just sell all the preamps and all the EQs, and you'll make a lot of money. You'll make your money and a lot more. And so it was completely gutted. A lot of those components were still there. Not super console nerdy, but it was basically the pre's and EQs were gone, and then a lot of the internal functions were missing. And so Ethan spent, I believe it was 6 to 8 years restoring
Years,
it.
not 6 to 8 months. Years.
Restoring it in his basement.
Wow.
And trying and using it on projects.
Wow.
So he's a
man.
very like
That's
successful
incredible.
engineer in his own right. And we had met him, I believe, around 6-ish years ago while this was still in his basement. And at Old Gnome, we talked about parking it there, but it wouldn't have fit in the control room. So it was always like if we ever move out of here and have a bigger studio, maybe one day we can have that API, because it's an iconic, classic, vintage API console. So when we found this space, we're like, hey, Ethan, this could work out.
Yeah.
So between our team and his team, like, we've combined our efforts to fully restore this thing.
It's incredible.
Which I can't tell you how many man hours has gone into this console, but the first time I heard this epic room with drums through this console, I literally started tearing up.
Really?
Because I was so used to what Old Gnome sounded like.
Yeah.
Like small room, brick walls, and then a little bit of wood walls. I knew how to make that room work. It was never like this incredible drum room. It was like the room that you could make it work.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
yeah.
It was better than a garage and better than a home studio. It was bigger with taller ceilings and the whole thing. But I always made it work. With this one, it was just like you plug in everything at Unity and you're just like, what? Why have I been missing this my whole life?
Right.
But the magic of the console and the room, like, it's a cabin, so you have the log walls and wood floors and wood ceilings.
Yeah.
And it's really tall ceilings. It just translates. It's like a match made in heaven.
I love that, man.
And even getting it into the studio is hilarious.
You said it's through the window, right?
Yeah. Getting through the door, we had to saw the roof or the ceiling. We had to saw the ceiling out to get it to fit through the door, go upright. It was on its side.
Yeah.
And then we flipped it this way. It weighs like a ton. And so we were scared that somebody would if it landed on somebody's arm, their arm's it's gonna shatter.
Oh my
So we were more concerned about somebody getting hurt than getting into the studio. So we deliberated a whole day. Like, friends had come to help. There's probably 20 friends of ours ready to help move this thing. You can only fit 2 or 3 people in the sound lock.
Oh, wow.
So we had to get on its side in a very precise and collective, if anything goes wrong, this console will fall and nobody gets hurt. That's what's going to happen. We're not going to risk anybody getting hurt. Thank God nobody got hurt. We safely, not dropped it, but let it slowly fall. Not fall, but it had to some degree, like, our strongest friends who work out all the time. Most musicians don't work out. Right. We called our gym friends to come help. They were on the other side holding it.
Yeah.
I've never heard men make these sounds before. The grunts I heard of the weight of this thing.
Oh my God.
It was terrifying. But by the time we got it on outside of the window, it was like the biggest relief. Because before we installed the windows, we knew, okay, it can go through the window because it wouldn't fit through the door. But then as soon as it made it into this room, it was like everybody was cheering and it was like, we made it work. So over the years, like, I would start collecting synths and leave them at the studio because I always saw value in, like, other people using the really hard to find instruments. It was always my personal dream to have at least 2, hopefully 3 uprights in like your Studio A and also a Grand. We always knew, like, an A-list studio in Nashville needs a C7 Grand. That's just the standard. Whether you're in love with the C7 or not, that's not really the conversation. It's, does this studio have a C7? Yes or no? If they do, okay, great. Country Sessions can make it work. If it's another random up grand piano, then you're out of that equation. So we knew we needed a C7. So then we found this one, it was a piano seller, had gotten this one from like a ballet studio from New York, brought it to Atlanta, and then he brought it to Nashville when we bought it. But this Studio A has the upright Steinway from our old Studio B. It has our upright Grand. It's a lot larger, so it sounds a lot bigger and fuller. And then we also added the C7. And then our other Studio B, the new Studio B, has like my old Yamaha M1, Japanese, like Nippon Gaki one that was in my house, just in my living room for writing and stuff. we needed another piano in the studio. So then I paid movers to move it because I didn't want any of us to get, because it's upstairs.
Yes.
I didn't want any of us to get hurt.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's technically 4 acoustic pianos in the studio. I have so many piano plugins, but there's nothing like the real thing, because then you can choose your mics, you can choose how distant you want it, the feel of it, you can felt it. There's so many things you can do with a real piano, and there's like the human emotion. Not every song will have real piano that I work on, but it just depends what we're going for.
Yeah.
And then there's the electric pianos. It's like you got to have a Rhodes, you got to have a Whirly, you got to have a B3.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the Mellotron is a plus to all of that. We have the Prophet 5, the Juno 60. You got to have a vintage string orchestral kind of synth.
Yeah.
So I have the Sequential Prelude. It's a really obscure synth. I've gone through 10 like obscure string brass synths, and this is the one to me.
Wow.
To me, this is the one that captures that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I'm not getting rid of that one.
Cool.
And then we have a Moog Prodigy. We're restoring a Moog Mini Model D, an original one.
Okay.
And we just found out actually today, Berto said, one of our house engineers was looking at under the hood, because we've been trying to restore this one for 2 years. It's just been at the back burner. But he opened it up. A friend of his saw it, and he's like, hey, it's missing this logo. This was definitely one of the, not prototypes, but early versions that Bob would have personally been hand wiring on.
Oh, wow.
Like he's trying to figure out like what the Model D should be, and somehow we didn't even know like we have one of these.
Oh,
which is crazy.
Goodness.
So hopefully it'll be fully restored and usable in the studio. I mean, we have tons of stuff, and if I ever have to get on like a live recording or something, and I need the Mellotron, or we have a CP60, which is like the upright version of a CP70, which has MIDI. So for live recordings, we use it on the City of God album, and all of our TBCO albums, we have the CP60 on the stage. And if Henry's leading, or Mitch or Bernie, Erms, incredible, very gifted, special people.
Yeah.
It's there. And so
it's amazing.
I actually have 2. The one at our church is mine, and it's been there for forever. I just leave it there. And then I found this one here.
Yeah.
And this one lives at the studio.
Okay.
But we moved it for the City of God album. And so that's all over that album. It's mostly MIDI. I think one song has the actual audio.
So you've been at TBCO for a while?
Yeah, I've been there since the beginning.
That's amazing.
Since before it was like proclaimed a church.
Yeah.
It was just a worship night. And I would just go on these worship nights on Tuesday nights. And a lot of my life started around 21, you could say. Like, started touring with Leland around that age, started the studio at that age, I produced my first EP with Andrew Holt. That was the first thing I ever produced.
It's amazing.
All within the span of 1 or 2 years.
Crazy.
And then attended the Belonging before it was a church, and then became a church. And I was like, well, I guess this is my church. It was like a thing that meant a lot to me at that time as like a Tuesday night worship gathering. And then when it was a church, I was like, I'm planting here, and if I move cities, then that's one thing. But I never intended to ever leave the church. I'm going to be faithful, and there's going to be hard times. There's going to be great times.
Right, man. There's
different seasons in church. And for me, for my own personal like walk with the Lord, it's like I just want to be rooted in one place through the good times, through the great times, through the hard times, through the really hard times, which my family went through a really hard time last year.
Really?
Just with like our baby. She was a micro preemie.
Wow. Was
in the NICU for 5 or 6 months. So we would go to the hospital while renovating this studio.
5 or 6 months?
Yeah. Basically half a year she was in the hospital. And then she just got off oxygen 2 weeks ago.
Oh my
And had just started sleeping without an oxygen tank.
Oh, wow.
So I couldn't have imagined going through that season. We're still in it.
Yeah.
But last year was like the thick of it without our church family. They were always praying for us, supporting us. Man. And that's what the church is for. Not obviously just to help everybody through hard times. There's the positive side of things, championing people even when they're like succeeding in life and whatever. Yeah. But then that's the purpose. It's like you have community of people, and you're not meant to do life alone. Yeah. And I don't know how we would have gone through the thick of last year without our church community. Wow. Like, aside from all the albums I've helped with as a keys player, played at church countless times, like on worship team, I've always valued the servant heart of it. Like none of us got paid for serving on a Sunday or a Tuesday night. So for us, it's just, this is our family. We want to pour into our church. And I don't think there's anything wrong if you get a salary or anything. I'm not saying that. It's just more for our church. This is the model that we found, like we could filter like the people who really just want to be a part of this community. It helped enable that kind of side of it.
Wow.
And then a lot of those people, they tour with other artists. So that's where they make their money, because that's how you make a living on this side of being a musician. That's a big navigation. But when it came to church, like that was a very special thing.
And that's amazing to hear about your newborn, y'all's baby.
Yeah. She's literally a miracle child, which is wild. Like I think the youngest surviving micro preemie might be like 21 weeks old, birth.
Is that 23?
And she was born at 23, but she was measuring 22.
That's crazy, man.
Yeah, it's crazy. There's like the medical side of things, like the NICU, like incubator thing simulates like the womb and all this stuff. Like prayer was so powerful. And then our church community, God and our church community were with us during the whole process. And
wow, man. Praise God for that.
Yeah.
Praise God for that, man. Tell us the difference between, for one, just tell us the difference between a producer and a programmer, because some people, it's a brand new term. We've never actually talked about keys programming, synth programming as far as production goes for a studio thing. Explain that a little bit. Intro that for us. What's the difference between producer and programmer?
Yeah, so one of my biggest goals and dreams personally from when I was like a 16-year-old kid in worship team, like just a key, like you're like teenage keys player at a small Hispanic church. That was me. There was a word spoken that I would hear the sounds of heaven and translate them to earth. And that was when I was 15. And I was like, I guess that's what I'm going to do with my life. Wow. From that moment, I was like, okay, whatever my life looks like, not that I make the calling the center. It was just like decisions I make are influenced by, does this align with what God's called me to do? And then the real challenge is, am I having the heart while I'm doing whatever it is? Am I still treating people the way God calls me to treat people in the process, whatever the calling looks like? So my dream was always to produce and write. I secretly wanted to be like a Max Martin.
Yeah.
That was my like teenage dream.
Love it.
Did not intend for that, but that's pretty great.
Yeah.
But yeah, when I moved to Nashville I just knew I was led to music. I didn't know what I was going to do. I just knew I'm going to align myself in a situation where I can be surrounded by music, and we'll see what God does. I didn't know keys and synth programming was a thing. What's funny is Patrick Mayberry was my first worship pastor, and he was the first person in Nashville to ask me to play keys at church. And we were part of a small church here in Nashville, like a church plant, and that was the first time I was like playing keys from not the church I grew up in. My parents were pastors. Awesome. Small Hispanic church, everything's in Spanish. Our youth was in English and stuff.
Okay.
But this was the first time I was like, wait, I'm playing keys at a church? That's not my like church that I grew up in. It was not a weird thing, but it was like a new thing that I wasn't like accustomed to. From that moment, I was just like, I guess I'm good at keys. I was trying to teach myself guitar. I would just like, maybe I just fully lean into keys world, because I can make beats. I would make beats in like Fruity Loops and Acid Pro. I don't know if anybody would know what that is. And GarageBand when it first came out.
Okay,
like
wow.
maybe the first iteration of it.
Wow.
And then when I got to college, 18 years old, and I'm like, maybe I should upgrade to Logic. And I'm pretty sure it's Logic 7 at the time.
Okay.
Maybe I feel like it was Logic 7 was the first time I got Logic.
Okay.
And then ever since then, dove into Logic. And I know it like the back of my hand now. So when Leland asked me to join the Leland band, they had started working on the Invisible album. Like they had just started co-writing for that song. And then Kyle Lee, the producer, he's one of my heroes and my biggest mentors. He's probably the person that's invested in my life more than anybody else. And I was like 22, 23, something like that. That album came out, I believe, in 2014, maybe. So he must have started in 2013 or 14, sometime around that window. Okay. He was like, David, you should just create some synth sounds and send them to me. And I was like, okay, this is fun. I do this when I'm like working on like my own music, or a friend at Belmont or something. That's another singer-songwriter. And so then I was like, okay, let me just go to town with synths. Leland plays piano amazing, so he would have done a lot of the piano. Casey's incredible at guitars. Like, all the pieces are there. And most of the Leland albums prior to Invisible would have been very, like, bandy, like guitar driven. And
Yeah.
Jack was always, like, the keys guy in that era, in those early Leland days. And he has his own thing. It's very Keen-esque, maybe some, like, Death Cab influence, like a lot of that kind of thing. And he always was that. And
Yeah.
it inspired me as a kid from afar. And so that when Kyle Lee asked me to do synths on the Invisible album, I was like, this is crazy. I didn't know you could just do that. I know that was even a thing. And so then obviously he's the producer. And so he brought me under his wing as like a keys synth programmer specifically for the Invisible album. And then he just kept asking me to keep doing that for a lot of albums he's worked on.
Wow.
I feel like the second album was maybe like a Lincoln Brewster album, and then there's a Michael W. Smith album, Surrounded.
Wow.
And then from that, a lot of the Gateway stuff over the years.
Gateway Worship?
Yeah, like the last 5 albums,
Bro.
Kyle Lee's produced them.
And
like
you did synth stuff?
Yeah, since Monuments till now.
Dude, I love Gateway Worship.
And what's hilarious is I was always the secret guy that none of them knew until a few years ago for the Espanol album, or one of the Espanol albums. I came out and played with the band live with them.
Yeah, yeah.
And they're like, for years we didn't know who you were. We're like, who's this mysterious David guy who does all these synths for our albums? But we never met him. But Kyle's really good friends with him. I like show up and I'm like, hey guys. But we had the best time.
It's like the Wizard of Oz.
And so like, I was always like this kid in Nashville, this random guy.
Dude,
and
that's so cool that you get Gateway Worship synth stuff.
Yeah, a lot
Just
of it.
synth stuff. There's a producer, there's keys players, there's other musicians, but then
Yeah.
you're doing like this programming synth stuff that kind of...
So yeah, to answer most of your question, like in those roles, like Kyle Lee is the main producer, and then there's the artists, and then there's the musicians like drummer, bass player, guitar player, maybe a piano player. But then Kyle, I don't know if it was super common at that time, but more like more prolific producers in like the pop world have their ghost producers, and like people that like Jay-Z might have somebody who makes him a ton of beats and then he sorts through stuff. There's that kind of like framework, but I don't think in CCM it was very like the same kind of thing. There's been a few people who went before me who paved the way. Someone like Matt Stanfield.
Yeah.
He was probably one of the people I can think of who was older than me who had been doing that, and I didn't even know that was a thing. And then I found myself doing it because Kyle Lee had asked me to do a bunch of stuff. Like within a year of Invisible, Jonathan Smith he was just starting to produce and write a lot of the stuff he was working on. And I'm trying to think, the first project he asked me to be on was like a North Point thing in like 2015, I think.
That's awesome.
It was just like one song he was producing.
Okay.
And then he's like, man, this is great. And so then he took me under his wing too.
Yeah.
And then for years, Jonathan Smith is in his own right also. He had me be a part of a bunch of stuff, and he's also one of my other big heroes, and one of the people that really poured into my life in this side of things. There's a handful of producers who I've worked under that I've just soaked in so much, like a plethora and wealth of knowledge, not just the technical stuff and song structures and songwriting and how to work and communicate with a band and an artist. Those are all great things. But more than anything, like Kyle and Jonathan, like their hearts are in the right place. I've just learned so much from that side of things to where I can operate on the technical side and the nerdy side of things from like a healthy place. One of the big things I learned from Kyle, he always had this phrase that I caught on very early when we first met. He has this phrase of just do things the right way. Not like the technical right way, but with the right heart. Ever since I heard that, I was like, I'm going to use that. Because whatever I do, like whatever hat I'm wearing, whatever role it is, if I don't have the heart of Jesus when I'm doing it, then why am I doing it? I might as well quit and do something else.
Come on.
And so that's
Preach it,
always
man.
been my heart.
I didn't know you were a preacher too, man.
That's why we do what we do.
Yes,
it's like,
yes.
that's got to be why we do it.
Absolutely.
And we're not going to get it right all the time. You know what I mean? I'm sure there was times I wasn't very friendly to somebody on the road. And I could make a million excuses of, yeah, we had 1 or 2 hours of sleep. But at the end of the day, it's like, why am I doing this? I'm here to bless people and give back to others what God has given me. And so,
That's good.
and I wouldn't be where I'm at without people who have paved the way before me and
Yes.
mentored me. So people like Kyle, Jonathan, some other people like Bernie Erms, Jason Ingram, those are all people, Jacob Suter, that over the years, Henry Seeley, so many people who are way old, not way older, but older than me, who've gone before me and done things the right way,
Right.
with the right heart posture, but also believed in me to do the technical thing well. I wouldn't be where I'm at without those people pouring into my life.
Yeah.
So now I'm at an age where how do I pour back into the other 20? Who are the 21-year-old Davids
That's good.
that I can pour into? And so that's a whole aspect of why I do what I do.
Yeah.
It's, yes, do what I'm doing in this season really well with the right heart, but also there's a season for everything. I'm not going to be producing my whole life as much as I would like to. I know I'm going to be old and irrelevant at some point, and that's fine. Like, I've accepted like the reality, like it's going to be okay. Like, my identity's not in this thing. It's rooted in Jesus and the kingdom and who he's called me to be. So how can I pour back in to the next generation while still being good at what I do in this season, but also learning from the people who have gone before me? So to answer your question,
I love that.
there's different roles. I've learned to be the musician role, like on a church, learned to be the like keys programmer, synth guy under a different producer. And then there's many projects that I've also produced and I'm in the shoes of the main producer.
Yeah.
And then delegating a lot of work to other people. Like, I'm hiring the band, like the drummer, guitar player. The DAW was always Logic. I would use analog synths all the time, rotate different gear, because I was always like, how do I get a new sound? That was always my thing. It's very biblical to make a new sound. I never wanted to just pigeonhole myself into, these are the tools I always use. It's like, I always made an effort. Same thing with the pedals I was talking about. If I buy a Prophet, I'm going to exhaust the Prophet.
Yeah.
I'm going to learn every detail about it, literally exhaust every ounce of sound it has, inject into music in the right way. I'm not going to force it. Like, I'm going to learn it so that I know how to insert it when it's necessary. And then I would sell the Prophet, get money back to buy something else. A Juno. These are all examples. And then exhaust the Juno. And then for a year or two, really exhaust that. But okay, I want to try something else. Let's sell the Juno and get my money back, put that into something else. And then over years, it's, oh, I know how to maneuver Juno. I know how to maneuver a Prophet.
Yeah, that's good.
And then a lot of these analog synths, they have the same, like, kind of wiring, like the way the signal flow works. It's all kind of the same basic math. So then you can get on any keyboard and you're like, oh, I know what the ADSR is. I know what the filter is. Then you just know how to program things on the fly, like even if it's something you never worked on before.
That's good. Now, of all the things you've worked on, I want to let everyone know this, that you don't really love Omnisphere and you don't really like the Nord.
Not that I don't like them, but when I was first starting out, Omnisphere was this thing that everybody used. It was one of these things that was like, I can't afford this. So you use the tools you have and you learn how to make gold with a $10 Casio keyboard. And I've always done that.
That's good.
And so then I dove into, okay, Logic has a bunch of stock plugins. They're not going to be the fancy thing, but I'm going to learn how to make these stock plugins sound incredible. And I'm going to, the same way I would exhaust a Prophet or a Juno. Or any hardware keyboard, I would do the same thing with individual Logic plugins. So like ES2, I dove into that and learned everything to know about ES2. When Retro Synth was brand new, I remember when that transition, when it was like introduced, it was like, what's this? It's kind of like an analog synth, but a plugin.
Yeah.
So then I exhausted everything to know about that synth. And I applied it to everything, not just the like software instruments, but like the built-in effects like chorus, modulation, any kind of modulation, delays, reverbs, EQs, everything. So then I would deep dive into every little compartment or like sphere of whatever this effect is or the sound. And so over time, I just never bought Omnisphere.
If you didn't
and
need
it was
you
also
don't need
like after the Invisible album, it was like people want to hire me to make sounds because they would all tell me it sounded different.
Yes.
Like, I've never heard these sounds before. And it's because I wasn't using the things that everybody was using.
Bingo.
And especially at that time, like, everybody used Alicia's keys, everybody used Omnisphere, and everybody would use a Nord. And I wasn't trying to be different. I just literally could not afford them in those seasons. And so I was trying to, make the best of what I had.
Yeah.
And in the process, I found, people are hiring me because I'm making sounds people haven't heard. They're learning how, and so it was unique to where, I want David for this thing because he does this thing. And they would tell me this, and so then I would build off of that. And then it's hilarious. If you put a Nord in front of me, I don't know what to do. My brain just fries. I'm like, what are these knobs? But you can give me any analog synth and I'll know exactly what to do. It's hilarious.
That's too funny, man.
Like, I've used Nords over the years, mainly as a MIDI controller, but yeah, I just could never afford one for a long time. Even though I had all these other synths, for me, it was like, I always had a laptop and I always had like a $200 MIDI controller. And in my mind, I'm like, well, this piano plugin in Logic is free. I'm going to use that. And I used that for years. The very first not stock piano plugin I bought was like UVI. The Model D. It's something like that. Grand piano. And that was the first, I have something that's not stock. But to me, when I would compare it to Nord, I'm like, it doesn't sound much different. So then I just got used to doing MIDI controllers with software. And I just found myself doing that. And that's what I was fast at and comfortable in. It's not like I was rejected the Nord and I rejected Omnisphere. But it was always like a backhanded joke with my friends. They're like, David doesn't use Omnisphere. I'm like,
doesn't need to.
I just never got it. And then not even just doing the same thing over and over again, but applying the same philosophy of it. Okay, I've used this one sound too much. Okay, next year, let's not use the sound at all. And I'm going to go searching again.
That's good.
And I'm always soul searching with songs and sounds. It's what is the right feeling? What's the emotion? What's the sound that connects to this lyric? What's the sound that connects to the meaning of the song? How do you connect those things? And that's where my brain's always sound searching.
What advice would you give to beginner synth keys programmer that might want to start doing what you're doing now?
It's always the same thing that for me, it was like the way I learned piano was, I'll tell you this quick story because it applies to the big picture question. But growing up, I wasn't allowed to listen to secular music.
Really? Where did you grow up?
In Austin, Texas.
Okay. Wow. Texas.
But I was adopted. My family's from Guatemala. And awesome, it's a very long and tragic story. But long story short, some pastors adopted me.
Okay.
And so they were also Hispanic. My adoptive dad is Guatemalan and my mom's Mexican.
Wow.
So my mom wanted me to meet her side of the family in Mexico. So we went when I was like 11, 12 years old, went to Mexico for a whole summer to live with my grandmother for a month, lived with one of my aunts for a month and one of my uncles for a month.
Okay.
And at my uncle's house with my cousins, we would play like Crash Bandicoot on an old Dreamcast, I think. I remember going to the bathroom, they're still playing, and I'm walking down the hallway, and in the corner the TV's on in the living room, and I hear this song, and I'm like, this very vivid memory of like my ears just, what is this? And MTV was on, and it was a music video of Chris Martin walking down the beach in black and white. I'm pretty sure it's black and white, singing Yellow. And that was the first time I heard music for what it was.
Wow.
And I was just this 11, 12-year-old kid just enamored by what I was hearing. I grew up, we had songs in worship in Spanish. I spoke English, but learned Spanish as a kid, but I never like connected with it. And we didn't have songs in English either. And so that was the first time I heard music for what it was. And I didn't have a dad who was like, hey, listen to this music, listen to this. It was just like, I didn't have that kind of relationship with my dad, and he wasn't musical. And so I was stuck watching this music video of Coldplay, and my cousin runs out. He's like, hey, we're waiting for you. You're taking too long. I was like, but what is this? And he's, that's a band called Coldplay. I have one of their CDs. So that night he burned me a copy of Rush of Blood of the Head.
Wow.
He let me borrow his cheap CD player with really cheap plastic headphones that are probably 2K and up and no low end, and like cheap plastic thing for $5 headphones. That night I put in the CD player. First track is Politic. It's the guitars like jing. I'm like this 11-year-old kid, and I'm like, I'm not allowed to listen to this. But I was like enamored with the sound.
Wow.
And Clocks and The Scientists and Green Eyes and all these songs, I was just like, what in the world? Like I connected with a sound.
Yeah.
And the like emotion. And so I secretly listened to that CD every night for 3 years, and my parents did not know.
For 3 years.
Yes. And my older brother had a cheap Casio piano that somebody like donated to our family, to our church or something. Like a cheap, just like those toy keyboards. So every night when I'm listening to this, I would listen to The Scientists or Clocks and find the notes by ear and teach myself like, oh, this is the melody. So then I started teaching myself piano in my bedroom at night without anybody knowing.
Wow.
But then one time my dad heard me around 12 years old, but he didn't know what I was listening to. And then he was like, hey, the lady in our church, she's older. The piano lady, we're going to need a new keys player. I heard you playing something. Can you play at church? And I was like, I don't know how to play piano. And I heard you playing something and it sounded good in your room. And I was like, okay, I guess I can. So then I learned how to make block chords. And then from then I was just playing I learned like the 4/3 and 3/4, how to make major and minors, and only one inversion and one bass note, literally like a robot in church playing chords. And then I was like, wait, I can move this one up here and get inversions, and then I could add notes, and then everything was basically self-taught. But then YouTube was starting to become a thing, so then I would learn a lot on YouTube. But most of the music is self-taught. You don't need to have this expensive piece of equipment to make great music.
That's good. That's
good. Other very funny side story that is also relevant is I remember the first time I heard Hillsong United because they had translated United We Stand to Spanish.
Oh, that's cool.
That was the first time I heard worship music sound the way that I had never heard it sound.
Right.
Because all I grew up with was Christian music that was in Spanish. But then I heard United We Stand in Spanish, and I was like, whoa, I didn't know worship could sound like this. And so our guitar player, we were going to try to introduce a song. I was like 13. And he bought a DD5, and before he only plays guitar through an amp, and that was it, no effects or anything, just like volume pedal or volume knob. But when he plugged in this DD5 and I heard delay for the first time, my brain, it's the same thing. I've always been connected to sounds and like music in that way.
Yeah.
And I looked at this device and I see these 1/4-inch inputs and outputs. And we had this cheap, what was it, a Korg like N264 workstation from like the 80s in our church. And I'm like, can I plug my 1/4-inch that goes into the DI into the sound system? Can I plug this into that, into your amp? And he's like, it doesn't work like that. They're made for guitars. But I was like, but it has 1/4-inch inputs. And
It worked, yeah.
My 13-year-old brain was like, I want to hear that sound with a piano. So then I played it. And then I was like, this is the sound of that U2 song, City of Blinding Lights.
And you found it.
And then after that, I went to Guitar Center as like this 13-year-old nerd.
Yeah,
and there's this wall of Boss pedals. And I was like, there's more of these? And they're different colors?
Yes.
So I didn't know how to play guitar. I would just hit a string, plug it, because you could test them all.
Right.
And I would hear every sound. The same way I approach Logic, even in sound designing today, it's like that 13-year-old brain of, I want to hear what this sounds like through this. I want to hear what this sounds like through this. And then I landed on the Boss RV5.
Oh, man.
And I was like, modulate setting, 13-year-old kid, just randomly didn't know pedals were a thing, and heard that like sound of what reverb was, but I didn't know it was called reverb. And I was like, I want that to be the sound of my piano.
Wow.
So I bought that. I think my dad bought it for me, and would play my cheap Korg workstation at our church. It wasn't mine. It was just the church's. Plug the Korg into that RV5 and I would have modulate setting. And I was sound designing since I was a kid. So
Crazy, man.
the best advice I could give anybody from the musical standpoint is always search for something new. There's always a new sound to be found. Like, it doesn't matter if you think every sound has been discovered, it has not. There's so many frequencies. There's so many different types of sounds, like synths, plucky lyre, dulcimer sound instruments, toy keyboards, Casios that sound digital and 8-bit. There's so many things, and then you apply effects, you can do compression. There's so many like avenues you could take, and the world's your oyster. The best advice I could do is approach, like, always have that on wonder with music and sound, but also use what you have. You don't have to spend a ton of money. If your church has a cheap keyboard, there's probably built-in effects in there. There's probably built-in things. There's a million sounds there. I would scroll through every sound. I'd go to Guitar Center whenever there's a new piano or keyboard workstation when I was a kid. I would scroll through every single sound and hear it and be like, that's cool. Oh, that's cool. That's weird. That's really weird. I don't like that one. But this one's really cool. And so then I would just hear sounds and like connect with music in that way. So never lose the awe and wonder of creating, and always try to tap into, even as an older person, like, I'm still trying to maintain that 13-year-old nerd kid alive, because I don't want to get burnt out doing this thing that I've loved doing for a long time. Then there's the like spiritual side of it. I never knew I would be touring with one of my favorite Christian bands and a lot of my favorite Christian artists as a kid. I never knew I'd be writing and working with people that I always aspired not to work. I never like wanted to work with anybody. Like, I just never saw that was even a possibility. It was just, I'm this kid from this tiny church in Austin, Texas. We're all Hispanic people. Like, I just never in a million years thought I would be where I'm at. But it's the same thing. It's like, I would tell myself, like, don't ever lose the why. Don't lose the reason why you're doing what you're doing. And the best reason is, like, Jesus created me to be like him. So in the process of playing keys at church, whatever hat I'm wearing, running a studio, working for a different producer, being the producer, writing, interacting with people behind the scenes, on and off stage, who is David? That's the question. Who am I? Am I somebody who has a lot of dreams and wants to acquire a lot of accolades and things along the way? Or am I someone who is kind, wants to bless people even when it costs me, gives people the time of day even when I don't have the time? Like, all those things add up, and that's what matters. Am I who Jesus created me to be in the process? Because if I'm not, why am I doing music? I might as well do a different thing. I could be a soccer manager, which is, if I quit music, I would love to.
Is that what you'd want to do? That's awesome.
I play too much FIFA. Not anymore. With kids, I don't have time for FIFA. But before kids, there was a lot of FIFA. That was my, like, escape from music. But yeah, I never want to lose the why and the heart of why I do what I do.
That's awesome, man.
That's how the kingdom is, and my time will pass, so I got to pass the baton too. For me personally, like, I've always seen, like, these different seasons. I'm like, if I hang on to this season too long, I won't step into the next thing God has for me, but also whoever's supposed to go into the season that I've been in, I'm actually holding them back because I'm in the way of somebody else walking into what God's called them to do. So it's season to season, glory to glory, for that matter.
Yes, that's good stuff, man.
Yeah.
That's good stuff, man. Now that I know that, it's amazing, because I'm going to be thinking about you as a 13-year-old kid in Guitar Center going through all the sounds. Because it's kind of like you with the MIDI controller now and Logic and with your template.
It all makes sense. It's all just embedded into who I am and how I operate.
I love that, man. That's so cool how God has gifted us each uniquely. Even within this niche of piano world, there's so many things that go into it and so many different avenues, even within just the keys world. Talk a little bit about some projects you've been working on right here in 2025, whether that be production work, like producer role, songwriter, or keys synth programmer. We were talking earlier, and you've had some stuff with Chris Tomlin and Wickham, which, as worship keys players, especially at churches. Tons of us are doing Chris Tomlin songs and Phil Wickham songs. And talk about some other artists and things that you're working on. I know, of course, you've been longtime friends with Leland and you've been involved with Belonging Co. as your church, but what are some other artists that you're working with right now in 2025 that you're super excited about?
Yeah, in recent years, the main things would have been with CeCe Winans, Since Belief for It, and then a lot of Phil's new stuff, a lot of Chris Tomlin's new stuff.
Phil Wickham always has this huge layer of sound
Yeah.
within his stuff. So.
Yeah, I was involved ever since Living Hope. That was the first involvement I have, and then ever since then I've been part of
crazy, man.
Not every song, but each album that's come out since then.
It's amazing.
And those are through because Jonathan Smith has been the main producer on a lot of those albums.
That's awesome.
And so and then he just brings me under his wing. So then in those situations I'm not a producer role, but I'm wearing the keys synth programmer hat.
That's so cool, man.
But yeah, earlier this year in January, there was Lizzie Morgan. I was just playing keys live with the band. And then there's a lot of other projects I produce and help develop, and just did a couple songs with Aaron Schuss, connected with the Christian Missionary Alliance denomination.
Okay.
And one of the songs we'll kind of walk through is under that Christian Missionary Alliance umbrella. There's a youth project called Heart Room.
Okay.
And so one of the it's more like pop, more youth friendly. That one is part of Heart Room. But then I'm also helping develop and work with the more corporate worship side, like Alliance Worship is the other side of under that big umbrella. And then I work on pop music randomly with friends. That kid that wanted to be Max Martin is
still there.
He's still there. And so I have a friend named Justin Kellum, and he's a amazing person, worship leader in Houston, and I've known him for 7-8 years maybe, and I've helped with his music for that amount of time.
That's awesome.
And that's just pop music.
Right.
He's a Christian and
yeah,
still leads worship, but then he has a side project. Every day looks different, and so yeah, there's a lot of projects.
I hope you've enjoyed it so far, hearing about David and just your musical background, man, and just how you came to love sound design.